Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. I'm Michael Dean, your host. You'll find me on the internet at property_funder. That's why the podcast is so named. Before we speak to our guest, Jamie, I would like to thank our sponsor, Avonmore Capital. Avonmore Capital is a development and bridging lender based here in London. We're actually at Avonmore Capital's offices on Cannon Street. Avonmore Capital lends between £250,000 to £25 million on bridging, development, refurbishment and part complete developments. Now, again, thanks for your patience, Jamie, but one more more bit of housekeeping. If you are a new visitor to the podcast, whether you're on Apple, Spotify or YouTube or any other platform, welcome. Thanks very much. If you enjoy what you hear, please can you like and subscribe to this podcast so that more people can hear from inspiring individuals like Jamie, who we've got here today. Now, Jamie, thanks for your patience there. Could you give everyone your full name and basically what you do?
Yeah, I'm Jamie Waller and I'm an entrepreneur from here in London. I'm also a philanthropist and an author, having written 2 books, Unsexy Business and my most recent book, The Dyslexic Edge.
Well, thanks very much for bringing that up. We've actually got a copy of The Dyslexic Edge here today, and I guess we can have we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in a bit more detail. Before we talk about that, could you just give a bit of background about you, kind of really how you got your journey into entrepreneurship? How did you get into your own businesses?
Well, as you can imagine, I'm dyslexic, hence why I wrote a book about it. And I grew up just around the corner from here in Bethnal Green, East London. Quite a poor upbringing, lived 2-bedroom flat above a shop. I was very fortunate at age 5. I came across a charity that was designed specifically to support disadvantaged children from East London called the IMPS Motorcycle Display Team. And I spent 11 years in that charity, which really gave me a lot of confidence and I guess was the start of my social mobility route out of life. And I left school without any qualifications, not a single GCSE, set up a window cleaning round for a year, sold that for £6,000, set up a car sales yard, which went bust, then set up a company in the outsourced debt recovery space. And fortunately, about 12 years later, sold that for upwards of £40 million. And since then, I've started and built and sold a number of other companies and own a few today.
Wow. Can I just say, Motorcycle Display Team?
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What does a motorcycle display team do? And why did you think that was a good idea to get into at the time?
Well, I saw at age 5. So my mum took me to a fete at London Fields in East London, and I saw these kids aged 5 to 16 riding about on motorcycles. Some of the older ones jumping motorcycles through fire, over cars. Some of the younger ones riding backwards on motorcycles, and it just thought, it looks like a great deal of fun. I didn't really realise, obviously, age 5, that it was a charity and it was only for disadvantaged children and it was to support children getting away from home, sort of inner city London housing estates. But my upbringing was not conventional because I lived with my mum and dad above a shop. My dad was an alcoholic. He used to beat my mum. So my home life was very disruptive. So once my mum saw that I had an interest in this, she thought, well, we should grab it with both hands, because she didn't have the confidence to leave my father. She needed him for the rent, to put food on the table. So she was quite happy to go through, well, I wouldn't say happy, but she was willing to go through life being abused to ensure that I had a roof over my head and food on the table. And the way she wanted to make sure that the effect of the abuse wasn't too great on me was by putting me into this charity. And it was tough on her, and some might say tough on me for a little while, because age 5, I was spending weeks and weeks away from home. Every school holiday we would go for the whole time, 6 weeks summer holiday, away for 6 weeks. But it taught me independence. It taught me leadership skills. The motorcycle display team has got a military theme running for it. So from age 5 to 16, I'd gone through all the ranks from a team member to a lance corporate, right up to team captain. By the age 16, I was managing 44 other children and representing the IMPS at various shows around the world. in Canada and in Singapore, in Holland, and also, on occasions turning up at the palace and putting on displays on behalf of the royal family, etc.
Wow, I mean, I guess for a working class kid from East London, what a great opportunity. And I imagine growing up where you did, you weren't short of opportunities to get yourself in trouble. So to have something really structured like that must have given you a great opportunity, a great set of structure to kind of keep you out of trouble. So I mean, that sounds amazing. How and age 16, what's the format? Does it stop? Can you then no longer do are you no longer allowed to keep doing it? I mean, what's the deal once you got to 16?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a children's based charity. So it's 5 to 16, and not many people do the whole 11 years. I did, but it's an interesting point that you raise because the transition from being a member of a motorcycle display team where every weekend you're putting on displays in front of a few thousand people, sometimes 50, 60,000 people at shows like the Edinburgh Tattoo, to then go from that to nothing and having left school around the same time without any qualifications, it is a real wake-up call, and it's something that actually in hindsight there should be a better transition to normal life. It's like coming out of the armed services or being a childhood TV star. You've really got to find, well, what's my purpose now? Because you've had a single purpose at such a young age, which is just not normal.
Yeah, it's like it's a bit like the footballers. People who are youth team footballers at big clubs. They get to 16, 17, they don't get the professional papers, and then what do they do? It's not unlike that in the sense that if you have to leave something like that at 16, you're not getting any money either way, right?
Yeah.
So I suppose, would you say, not to criticize them because obviously they did a lot for you, but would you say that was the one thing that you wish that they might have done more for you in?
Well, I'm not too sure, and I should say I'm now their main sponsor and have been for the past 20 odd years. So the team still exists and still does for those from East London that it did for me. I think the reality is it wasn't just the abrupt end of my motorcycle career. It was also that it was an inflection point because I didn't qualify for any GCSEs and my dyslexia was really holding me back, and so it was a number of things that just all happened to come around at the same time. And obviously in 1996, when I was 16, you were expected to leave home at 16. It's not like it is today where people may stay at home until their late 20s. So your entire friendship network of the motorcycle team is coming to an end. You've not got any qualifications, which means that you're unable to go on to college or where some of your other friends might be going on to sixth form, etc. So you're losing another bunch of friends. And then you're in this real grown-up category of being the 16-year-old that's now expected to pay housekeeping and go out to work. So you really have to grow up very quickly. And, ultimately that's what I had to do. I had to go and get any job to be able to contribute towards the house and make sure that I was paying my way.
So you started with window cleaning rounds. What did that look like? Was that just you with a bucket and a sponge and a ladder, or did someone employ you to do that?
Yeah, no, it was me with I went and bought not too far from here, just on City Road. There used to be a window cleaning specialist shop, and I used to see people park outside there, and I used to think, well, that's not a bad job actually. You get to manage yourself, walk around in the summer in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. So I went down and I bought bucket, ladders. I went in as a young kid going, what do I need to clean people's windows? And the guy's like, you need X, Y, Z. And then I just went and gave it a go. I mean, it was such an easy business to set up because you found a street that you thought, it's all about how many windows a house has by how much you can charge them. So you find houses with lots of windows and you go and knock on a door and you say, can I clean your windows? And if they say, I already have a window cleaner, you get back in your car and you find another street, because the likelihood is if they have a window cleaner, their next door neighbor has one, their neighbor has one, and it's the same person at that time, same chap. And then when you found a street that someone said, oh yeah, actually, I would consider that, you go at it, hell leather. You just walk that street all day, all night, knocking on doors, leaving leaflets. Can I clean your windows? Can you clean your windows? Because as a window cleaner, what you don't want to do is clean a house on one street and then have to drive 2 blocks to another. You want to do 10 on the same street because,
it's efficient,
the economy of scale is efficient, yeah. And that's what I did, and it was great. And then after about 6 months, I employed somebody to help me do the houses that if a house has, remember those houses used to have those lead windows, the diamond windows, they're no one wants to clean them. If you want to be a window cleaner, to any of your listeners or viewers, today, you can go and clean any of those people's houses because typical window cleaners will avoid them. And one of the things I learned quite early on actually was that the Harvester restaurant chain, almost all of them had those with diamond-shaped windows. And at a Harvester, I used to get paid about £120 to clean the windows twice a week and free lunch. So I used to do all my window cleaning in the morning, go to the Harvester one, clean theirs early afternoon, and then sit there and have some lunch and a couple of pints of beer and make my way home. I mean, it really was one of the best jobs I've ever had.
You're selling it to me. I mean, it's not exactly the best window cleaning weather today, even though we're in the middle of June. But yeah, you certainly have a nice sunny day. Most 7-8 months of the year. You're outdoors, young kid. You got your headphones in. Happy days. Yeah, I can definitely see the attraction of that. But eventually someone bought your window cleaning round from you. So why did you decide to leave window cleaning? Maybe the answer might be obvious to our listeners, but you can elaborate. And someone actually paid you for your contracts essentially.
Yeah, so I left window cleaning honestly because it just got cold. I was just bored of walking around in the rain. In the summer it was brilliant, but it got to month 8 or 9 after setting it up, and I was like, I'm not really into this anymore. But more importantly, during cleaning windows, I used to clean the windows of this shop on the Woolwich Road. And, those that don't know the Woolwich Road, it's a huge, 3-lane road each direction in southeast London, heading right to Blackwall Tunnel. So it's got so much traffic going down it. And I used to do this cost cutter shop there, and the chap that owned the cost cutter had a disused piece of land next to it. And one day I just thought, and I'd always thought, the Woolwich Road is full of car sales yards. It must have 7 or 8 of them on there. And car sales yards are like estate agents. They all group together because when people want to buy a car, they like to go to one street and pop in 5 different yards and purchase a car. So I said to this chap, can I rent this piece of land for you? And he said, well, am I going to lose my window cleaner? And I said, no, I'll continue to clean your windows. So we did a deal for £100 a week, and I rented this piece of land, continued to clean his windows, and I went to an auction, bought a bunch of cars with the money I sold the window cleaning round, which was just £6,000. But, I bought cars for £300-400, was selling them for £700-800, and it enabled me to start trading. The problem is at 17 years of age, I didn't know about planning laws or anything like that. I just did it. So it was quite short-lived when Transport for London came along about a year later and put double red lines outside. And when I tried to complain to Transport for London for having double red lines outside my car sales yard, they said, well, it's not even supposed to be a car sales yard. You got nothing to complain about. So I had to close. And, but while I did it, it was great. Made loads of money.
Yeah, I would dare say that car sales yard might have been a car washing place, in today's market. Yes. Okay, so you stopped the car sales yard and then debt recovery. So how did that start? And talk us through the development of the debt recovery business.
So it was really simple. I was watching ITV News at home during the time of the double red lines, and I was feeling pretty sorry for myself, wondering what I'm going to do next. And you would have all these market traders being interviewed on the news from sort of Billingsgate Market saying, well, we don't care about the red lines. We're going to tell our customers to park there anyway. And, we don't care. And then you'd get this smartly dressed chap from TfL on there saying, well, if you don't pay, we're going to send the instruction to these debt recovery agencies and they'll come and they'll take your goods. And I thought, well, there we go. This is the Red Route had just been introduced. And I thought this is going to go crazy because there was a real pushback on TfL that people were simply going to not pay. And TfL were standing strong and saying, well, if you don't, this is what we do. So I thought, well, that's interesting. There must be an opportunity here. So I got a job as a self-employed bailiff for a company that was in East London, and I thought I'd give it a go. I thought if I can learn about the industry, I can then probably go and do it myself. So self-employed obviously suited me because that's all I'd done until that stage. And after a few months in the role, I just realized that the people that I was working with were just simply terrorizing people. They were authorized by government to go and collect money from people, but it was the practices were so bad. And I thought, I just can't do this because they're visiting people that are like me, like my mum, like my dad, like my uncle. They're people that grew up in hardship. And then, but my real sense of injustice, which is quite typical for those with dyslexia, I thought, well, do I leave or do I try and fix it? And I decided to try and fix it. So I went and set up in competition with a company that I was working for, which went down like a lead balloon, by the way. You try and compete with the bailiff sector in 1996. It led to lots of threats, violence against me, and all sorts of stuff. But I was just determined more and more. Every time they tried to put me down, at one stage, I had the police install CCTV around my house because I had threats that the IRA had been paid to kill me. But I was so determined because I'd been given that purpose again. It was like having that purpose when I was in the motorcycle team to go out and perform. I now had a purpose to shine a big, bright light on this sector, that it shouldn't be being done the way it was. And I was very successful. I built that company over the next 12 years into the largest privately owned company in the sector.
That was called JBW Group, is that right?
That's right.
Did you ever need to bring in external investment into JBW Group, or was it just something that you grew organically? It started with you and you started to employ more, you started to employ other people to do bailiffs on a subcontracted basis or whatever. Or was there ever a point where you were like, right, actually, I need some money now to help it grow? What did the growth story look like? We
took a tiny bit of money. So what happened actually is I set up my first company, which was called Wise Hill, and with a business partner, and operated that for a year. And we built it from zero to £1 million worth of turnover without any external investment. But I realized that I was doing all the work and he was doing nothing. And we had a bit of a bust up, and I said, well, I'm leaving, thinking that there's no way he would let me leave because he didn't have a clue how to run this business. And he said, off you go then. So I walked out of that business that evening, set up JBW Group. But to set JBW Group up, I literally had nothing. I had been working for the first year in this other business for 30 odd grand. And I could just about afford to live. And so I did go to a friend that I wanted to be involved in a business, a chap called Dave Waitson, who was amazing during that time, a much more older, wiser figure, sort of a father figure, and said to Dave, do you want to get involved? And he had a history of working for government. And I think it was £25,000, I can't remember, but he got us our initial bit of money to go and buy a bunch of computers, put a phone system in, and rent an office in Old Street above Costco, actually. There's a connection there again. And that got us going. And then from that point onwards, we simply, we traded through growth and sold that business for just over 40 million quid.
Was that, at your height, how many people were working for you?
About 170 people. I mean, enough where it becomes painful. I mean, with the reason I sold JBW for two reasons. Well, three reasons actually. Fundamentally, I only went into business to become rich. I know many people don't want to talk about that, but I was poor and I simply just didn't want to be like my parents. I wanted to be wealthy. So once I knew I'd achieved enough wealth creation, I wanted to exit. The second reason was I really had cleaned up that industry significantly. We had got a single set of regulations entered by the Ministry of Justice in my tenure at JBW. We had made so many changes to make that industry better for the people that it affected most. And the third reason was I just wasn't enjoying it. A CEO of a 200-person organization, multiple offices across the UK is not my thing. I'm a creator. I like to create things. And since JBW, I've done a few more startups, one of them that's gone through exit, one of them that's in the process of exit, and another one that's in very high growth stage, Mark. But, my thing is taking something that's nothing and making it into something and enjoying that that initial growth.
Yeah, and I think I can probably relate to what you're saying as well, because some people are born to be administrators, and some people are born to be creative, and creative types of people who who start things and grow things along. And obviously, on this podcast series, we've had broadly more people in your camp, but we also had people who are better successful employees. Actually taking established businesses and running them very well. Yeah,
and those. We must also remember that those people make great business partners too, right? They're not just employees. So, I've got a team around me now that I've on and off used for 20 odd years. And it's really important to get a diverse group of people together to be successful in business. And that means that, the chap with dyslexia or ADHD who keeps on wanting to create things is great, but you don't want 10 of them. Actually, you probably don't even want 2 of them. So it's getting that balance.
Yeah, I think you certainly want people with complementary skill sets, and certainly within with my own experience, with Avamall, for example, we started the business with 3 of us. Essentially, we were joined by a 4th kind of partner in the business, and we all had very individual skill sets, very complementary skill sets, and we all sort of had each other covered. But and certainly there were some areas of overlap, of course, but fundamentally, the business would have been disaster if there were 4 of me, or 4 of Zaire, or 4 of Nick, or 4 of Amit. You all need each other's different skills and particular ways that we do things to make a business like ours successful. So, yeah, I completely relate to that. You're talking about. I have a question here about innovating the debt recovery space. Could you just explain to our listeners sort of what the debt recovery space looked like in the mid 1990s from a sort of regulatory basis? Was it sounded like anyone anyone who'd been down the gym could go down and start doing debt recovery and being a bailiff. Presumably now it's more tightly regulated.
It is, yeah. And it's really interesting. So one of the most shocking things to me when I started was actually that So for a bailiff to be authorised to act, they're now called enforcement agents, which is something I strongly pushed for. But for an enforcement agent to be able to act in 1997, when I got into the industry, if they were to collect a parking ticket, they would need to have a licence to act by the court, the county court. They would have to go and stand in front of a judge, do a verbal examination, prove they're a good fit person to uphold that type of the law. If they were to enforce a criminal penalty, you've been fined for drugs, speeding, knife crimes, not turning up to bail, etc., you needed no qualification at all.
No.
It was unbelievable. And so what you had these companies with these groups of men, typically, almost wholeheartedly, that went around in 2s, in their own cars, in baseball caps, jumpers, and knocked on people's doors on behalf of the court with a warrant endorsed by the royal family to either take your money or remove your goods. It was unbelievable. So one of the first things, I talk about how you innovate the bailiff industry with quite a lot of joy, because the first innovation I did was simply bring in some of the rules from the IMPS into the bailiff sector, which were, you had to wear a uniform. We uniformed the bailiffs. We never allowed them to go out in 2s, only single-handedly, because we thought if they turned up at people's homes in 2s, it would cause more threat and create conflict. We also went and leased a whole fleet of vehicles so that they were in plain white vehicles rather than, some of them were turning up in Range Rovers, some of them were turning up in BMWs. It was atrocious. And then we had some simple policies like no tattoos. If you had tattoos, you wouldn't get away with it today. But in 1997, this was quite normal. No visible tattoos. If you had tattoos on your arms, you'd had to wear long sleeve shirts, no facial jewelry, no facial hair. We made sure that people, as in stubble, if you had a beard, you had a beard, but you weren't allowed to be unshaven. And we put these very simple rules in to try and make the staff more aware of the authority that they'd been given. And I'm a strong believer in that today. Part of my IMPS upbringing and that military process of, you put on a uniform, and you behave like a gentleman. Once you take your uniform off, it's free time, go and do whatever you want. And I wanted our agents to believe that and feel that. I wanted them to get dressed in the morning and look in the mirror and go, I am being given immense amount of authority on behalf of the country. I need to act appropriately at all times.
Yeah, and I guess we see the benefit of that, across the country to this day, thanks to some part of the efforts of yourself. Although I can't say it's a TV program that I watch myself, the Can't Pay, Take It Away. A lot of the conduct that people will see on the TV will be, which largely will be good conduct, certainly on TV anyway. Will be thanks to the efforts that you put in. So hats off to you on that. I want to talk about neurodiversity as we were talking about off camera. It's something that is very important to me. I've got my oldest son he's got ASD, albeit quite mild ASD, and my youngest has got ADHD. So I've got two children who are neurodiverse. Obviously, you talked about having dyslexia and ADHD, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as to how we might be able to better harness the talents and abilities of all these kids that are growing up now, especially with the increased diagnosis levels of these conditions. How do we get the best from kids who are neurodiverse in this part of the 21st century that we're in?
It's a great question. I've just spent 16 months working with Dr. Helen Taylor and a bunch of others researching this subject. And I mean, the reality is where we need to get to is we need to get to a redesigned learning system, because we are damaging the confidence of these young people in their early years because they are simply not like their friends and peers. And they can feel that before you can notice it. So somebody with dyslexia or ADHD, they will know that they are not the same as somebody that sat next to them before you're even considering getting a diagnosis or a test for it. The reality is that the learning system was just designed incorrectly. So 15% of the population, for example, looking at dyslexia, are dyslexic. Now, dyslexia being badged as a disability is nothing more than it's useful for government to be able to give it a badge, to give it some funding, and say that they're doing something about it. The practice of reading and writing has only really been around for the last 500 years. We created that technology. That was an innovation made by humans. And the whole reason it was created was to prevent knowledge loss. It was so that when people died at age 30, 35 or 40, which is when we used to lose people back then, we wouldn't get all of this knowledge loss through society. And so it was vastly important. But what we did is we took this, we don't want to get knowledge loss, into mainstream education, which actually 80% of mainstream education today is simply learning from what others have already done. It's learning things that we already know. There's very little of it that's learning something new. And the neurodiverse mind is more focused on new information. So the human brain is designed to dump what it believes is useless information to make room for more useful information. But if you've got something like dyslexia, for example, then your brain is more wired towards that, because you are simply what we describe in the book. You are born as an explorer. We believe that the category and the research that Dr. Helen Taylor has done is that people aren't born with dyslexia. You're born an explorer or an exploiter. 15% of the population are explorers, 85% are exploiters. If you're an explorer, you do not learn in the same way as an exploiter. We happen to now call that dyslexia. But when people say to you, for example, dyslexics are great because they think big, they take risks, they see the bigger picture, etc., etc., it's not the dyslexia. it's the way they were born. It's because their mind and their brain is wired that way. The dyslexia is just a badge that we've given to a difficulty with learning in a manner that we designed ourselves that simply wasn't fit for everybody in society. So where we need to get to is there. But what can we do now? Because simply saying to government, this is your issue, you've got it all wrong, fix it. Well, I don't come from that stock. I want to take action and do things today. And what I do think we can all do is start to have a different outlook and communicate that outlook on what this really means. But I also don't think it's simply I don't think it's useful to simply say that dyslexia is a superpower, because it is an Achilles heel too. And those with dyslexia or ADHD or other neurodiverse items, just they have things that affect them every single day. I mean, I got a train today, which I never do, but I do it 2 or 3 times a year. And I bumped into somebody on the train who's a father at my children's school, and we were talking. And he said, "Oh, I've never seen you on a train before." I said, "Actually, I never use it." And we laughed because I said, the last time I used it, I accidentally got on the wrong one and went to a completely different part of town and had to get my wife to pick me up. And the time before that, I got fined because I was accidentally traveling on some sort of dispensation for wounded soldiers. And that's not because I wanted a discount for wounded soldiers. It's because my dyslexia got in the way of me being able to do some of life's most simple tasks. And that's the reality. So it is still an Achilles heel. So I don't think it's useful for us to simply rebadge it. But what we need to do is make children understand that they are wired to be different. It's not a disability. What the 85% are capable of is not normal. Normal is that some of us are wired this way and some of us are wired that way, but it ultimately takes a mixture of the two. We were talking about this earlier on, about a diverse bunch of people to make things work. You need dyslexic thinking in organizations, in governments. If you think of some of the biggest inventions on earth, flight, light, the iPhone, all from dyslexic thinkers. The reality is that if you want climate change to be resolved, it will probably be a dyslexic thinker. We need to be telling kids this. Make them feel great about how they've been born and the opportunities that lay ahead them. And in this book, The Dyslexic Edge, we interview 14 different dyslexic thinkers, ranging from Sir Charles Dunstan, who took £5,000 and set up an organization that he later floated for a couple of billion. Paul Orfler, who set up Kinko Print in the US with 20 grand, and it sold for about $4 billion. Kelly Hoppen, the famous interior designer, features in the book and told us her story. Duncan Bannatyne, Theo Paphitis. Dyslexic thinking, neurodiversity is all around us every day. And there's some great statistics around it. 15% of us are dyslexic. 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic. But unfortunately, so are 50% of all UK prisoners. And we need to fix that.
Yeah, that's quite the paradox, isn't it? That's quite the divide. Very binary, very worrying and binary outcome in that regard. And by the way, I think you're absolutely right, because and I'm interested to get your take on this. We enter into now, the age of AI. The benefits of rote learning things at school are becoming increasingly less valuable. We can touch on the downsides of the education system and all the things that it needs doing. For example, I look at my kids' English homework. I've got kids who are 13, 10, and 9, and the younger two are doing this sort of what sort of adverb is this, and I imagine you'll relate to this, especially with having kids of your own. And I said to my wife and I, we're both, we've both got double degrees and, whatnot. So, it's not like we struggle for education ourselves. We both looked at each other and we said, how on earth is this benefiting our kids going forwards? Why do they need to know what sort of adverb this is? And actually, the point that I think you're making is that dyslexic people have got that ability to think differently, to be creative. And in an AI era, or the AI era that we're about to go into, surely we need more people who are able to think differently, to approach problems from a different angle, so that we can fix, like you said, things like climate change, and there's certainly no shortage of problems out there in the world. Surely we need more, not fewer, people who can think differently.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It's a hugely powerful moment for those with dyslexia right now, and it's been getting more and more powerful for many, many years. So, 15 years ago, with the introduction of the personal computer. So if you were dyslexic and leaving education 25 years ago, your chances of being one of the 35% that are entrepreneurs, 40% that are self-made millionaires, or 50% of prisoners was probably more swayed towards prisoners, unless you had a really good upbringing, etc. But as the years have gone on, we've been given these tools: the personal computer, spell check, Google, Microsoft Word. All of these things have been making what the majority of the population do well easier for those that think differently. And then you layer on this AI. I mean, I use ChatGPT every single day of the week, probably at least 5 times, sometimes 10 to 15 times a day. It makes me so much more powerful. So if you can get, in the past, a dyslexic thinker would have had to have teamed up with a non-dyslexic thinker to get things done. They can just team up with their laptop now. It's quite remarkable. But we do need the education system to embrace these new forms of technology. And I fear that that's not going to be easy. I mean, schools still don't embrace spell check. So I see a lot of articles on this at the moment. A lot of people ask me the question, what do you think about AI and dyslexia? I go, let's get spell check and dyslexia accepted first.
Well, I also wonder whether, schools running the risk of reinforcing, or creating, you talk about the prisoners component. Do schools potentially run the risk of or the schooling system creating people who think that there's no hope for them in society? Because I take my son with ADHD, for example, and he's in a private school, and they sort of know how to manage him. But if he was in a state school in maybe a more deprived area, the teachers are basically just hanging on for dear life. And, asking a child, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, probably even worse as a teenager, to sit for an hour, or, sit in double maths, or sit in double English, or whatever, right? We're talking, 80 minutes, 90 minutes straight with no break. Asking them to effectively sit there and listen and pay attention when they're having to read things, they're having to consume information that maybe they can't process. They're asking them to have the same patience, the same ability to same processing expectations for someone who is more neurotypical, and of course they can't handle it, and they start acting out, and then and then it probably and almost certainly creates a spiral, a behavioural spiral that ultimately leads to them getting excluded, for them bunking off school, and then leads them down a potentially dark path. Surely the education system needs to be more lateral in it, have a bit more lateral thinking, and have a different approach to cater for these kids.
Yeah, of course, but I'm a strong advocate for not separating these kids into, there's a mix. It's either not dealt with or it's dealt with. And when it is dealt with, in the most part, it's dealt with by segregation. It's dealt with by somebody coming along at the beginning of your double English class and saying, Jamie, are you ready? And taking you out to a porter cabin down the road, or a different, smaller classroom with a bunch of other children that are struggling. And you do your lesson there with more support. I argue that we should be redesigning learning so it's fit for everybody, so that they can stay in the same room. Because I'm not too sure that it's the best use of 40 or 80 minutes of your time as a non-neurodiverse person either. And wouldn't it be better if we embraced learning through video, through gaming, and through technology in more general, because everybody will benefit from it. And the reality is, when you go into the real world, you are going to work with people in different formats, in different ways. So I just think that simply taking this learning system that was designed by the church to remember the Bible into mainstream life and still expecting it to stand up against the test of time is nothing but simply nuts. It's just stupidity at the highest of levels. I watched the debates at the moment for the general election, and you've got VAT on private school fees, and you mentioned that your boy with ADHD goes to a private school. The reality is, private schools are full of neurodiversity because parents really believe that the state system is unable to cope. So they work so hard to put them in there and support them. And if you simply apply additional 20% to those fees, the children that filter back through to the state school system are likely to be overrepresented of neurodiversity, dyslexia, and they're not going to be able to get by. It's nonsense. I had run the statistics after the first debate that said, we're going to employ 6,500 more teachers with this money we raise from VAT. Well, the reality is, if you look at the poll data on how many children are going to leave private education and go into state schools, it requires 8,000 teachers to simply stand still. We are putting sticky plasters on what is a significant problem in our learning system. And one might argue that if we really look at learning and look at it with some of the best technical minds in the world, LinkedIn Learning, Khan Academy, Nessie, these companies are making such progress in how to deliver content digitally. And if we really engage globally or at a country level to sort out learning and get it right, maybe we do need less teachers. Maybe there's less education time. Maybe we don't need kids to sit there for any 80-minute lessons. Maybe, there's some great statistics around 20 minutes is the ideal time. But going back to your thing about, well, they're not going to remember anyway. I mean, the opening paragraph of my book is a brilliant one. There's a chap called Cliff Wiseman who owns a company called Speechify, a huge force for good in the US, a tech business. And I wouldn't mind just reading it to you because I think it's it made chapter 1 for a very good reason. It says, this is Cliff. What's 4,342 divided by 16? Now divide that by 12. This is Cliff Wiseman's brilliant illustration of the computer overload the dyslexic brain takes when reading a paragraph like this.
Wow.
That's the reality. You read a paragraph, you forgot the first sentence by the time you've got to the end of it. That's challenging. So what's the answer? I guess stop asking them to read paragraphs. Get the information in differently.
Finding different ways to do it. And I guess, you talked about the technological advances. I mean, presumably as well, I'm sure the rise of audiobooks for someone like yourself who's dyslexic, as a means of consuming content and information is probably a far better learning tool than being handed a book or a paper or a magazine.
Yeah, and obviously, and some of these issues overlay themselves, which make things even more difficult, right? So I was born with dyslexia, ADHD, colorblind, and poor. The statistical chances of me doing okay are quite low.
But that's quite a lottery win. You just got that.
It's quite a lottery win. But so reading a book is difficult for me as a dyslexic. It's a lot more difficult for me as a dyslexic with ADHD.
Because you can't. Because one of the benefits of ADHD is you get hyperfocus. But if it's not something if you're combining the ADHD and the dyslexia,
exactly,
how are you going to ever get? You're either hyperfocused or you completely.
Yes. Give me a business plan, give me a set of numbers of an investment opportunity, and I will nail it. Give me a bid that's about to go in for a contract where we might win 10 million quid, and I'll work on it for 17 hours flat and make sure it's the best piece of work that we've ever pushed out the door. But give me a book about Jesus, or give me a book about ancient Greece. I have not the faintest desire to want to retain that information. And my brain just is simply not wired in a way that it will.
Yeah. And as you know, if I think about my son who's got ADHD, very similarly, it'd be very similarly approached. Very smart kid, does very well academically, but if you ask him to do something he doesn't want to do, it's like, but then he can sit and play video games or watch his favorite TV shows for literally hours on end.
So why can't we embrace the computer game thing? I think young people get a really hard ride in society these days, actually, definitely now during an election. But, you never have to tell a young person to get off a computer.
No.
But you certainly have to argue with them almost every single night of the week about doing their homework. Now, why can't we embrace some of that technology? It just makes sense, doesn't it? It's like embracing faster transport network to get people somewhere. Would you do it? Of course you would. If you can embrace a technology that would allow people to learn faster or learn more efficiently or learn at all, why on earth wouldn't we do it?
Yeah.
Out of some sort of fear?
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. I mean, I did the language learning app Duolingo, and I was quite loyal and quite faithful student of it for a number of months, and learned Spanish to a decent degree of proficiency. I've fallen out of the habit a little bit, so my Spanish is now a bit more rusty.
I won't test you.
Yeah, don't. But I think about that and the effectiveness of that means of learning. And I think about my son has this app called Mathletics, and he's like, so Marcus is the young one with ADHD. He's really enthusiastic about doing Mathletics, but then you ask him to do some written English in cursive writing, because it has to be in cursive, of course. It'll take 2 hours to get him to do that. Whereas he'll finish his Mathletics homework in 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, it just makes sense, right? I mean, I have some conversations with my youngest, who's 7, and sometimes she'll say to me, "Oh, is it like this?" And I'm like, "Where did you learn that?" Because I think that's not something she'll learn at school. And she says, "Oh, on YouTube." Children take in this information so well. I mean, YouTube wouldn't exist if they didn't. And it's not just children, it's all of us. We all take in this information so well. So why not embrace it? Why not introduce it? And I'm not talking about taking the children out of the classroom and introducing it to them in isolation because you're fearful that, the other children will want it too. Embrace it into all learning. I think we should be using all different formats, voice, video. I think gaming has got to be, if you look at most of the technology programs that are designed to help those with dyslexia, they are all gaming.
Yeah, completely. Gamification is, Duolingo is a great example of it.
Yes.
If you turn learning into a video game, it's nothing new or novel about it. But I still think the traditional educational industry is still very, very slow to embrace it.
Well, because the people that are in charge of it and the people that, if you wanted to do a research piece, the people that have to endorse it to get it published are all academics. They're all people that have been through the system and the system worked for them. So they see no wrong in it.
No.
They're asking the wrong people to give them the answer on, is learning in its current format fit for the next 100 years? They're asking the wrong people. We need to take it out of the hands of academics and put it into the hands of us, the people that have been through it.
No, you're quite right. Following a slight segue, but on a similar theme, when you sold your business, when you sold JBW Group, at that time, at the time you were doing it, you'd have had great big contracts, lots of representations and warranties and all the rest of it. How did you approach that? I mean, given the complexity of the legal wording, which and I've got plenty of experience in it, and I still, every time I get a document this thick from a set of lawyers, it fills me with dread, makes me want to be a little bit sick. But I'm not dyslexic, and although my wife sometimes teases me on that I am neurodiverse, I'm probably not neurodiverse either. So I'm sort of reasonably well equipped to deal with something like that. when you were going through that sale process, how did you compensate for, sort of your own limitations when you're faced with essentially what was then the biggest deal of your life?
So, I mean, you spend loads of money outsourcing it, typically, right, on advisors. But if you think, I mean, the one thing that I would say, I don't like to attach strengths to dyslexia in itself. I think that you're born with those strengths anyway. But one of the things that definitely happens as a young person that's not fitting into the learning system is that you find your own ways of dealing with that. So you find a friend that will allow you to copy some of their work. You find how to exchange cigarettes for homework, and you find ways to get through. And as you get older, that leads to, I can now pay for ways to get through. But also, one of the most powerful things about any neurodiversity, I think, is to come out and say you are. It's like a homosexual person coming out. It's the same with dyslexia. The moment you come out, life gets so much better because people expect less from you from that. So somebody gives me something now and I need to turn it around in an hour. And if I'm at home, then I can lean on my wife, who's also dyslexic, but has a much better ability to read than I do. Or, can you check that for me? How do I spell this? Once you get comfortable with asking for that help, because I don't care. Yes, I'm dyslexic. I'm really proud of it. Then you get by so much further. So you don't need money to be able to deal with those things. You need confidence to be able to say, hey, I need help. But if you simply say, I need help, and you don't tell people why, they'll think you're just trying to offload the rubbish part of the work to them. So if you've got a business partner and every time a contract comes in, you go, oh, you read that and tell us if we can sign it, and you haven't told them, well, it's because I'm dyslexic, I don't want to make the error, then they're just going to think, is he taking that? Right? Why do I always have to do this? So that's not good. Come out. I'm dyslexic. Need some help with this. Can you help?
So in that sort of deal scenario, you effectively were able to lean on what lawyers and also other people within the business who are who are just better suited to that sort of task.
Yeah, absolutely. And will there be some errors within sale documents and stuff where we've sold organizations? Would there be some things that I wouldn't have left in there? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, you have to trust, right? But I come from a environment where I accept 80% quality 100% of the time. I'm really focused on the motion of keep moving forward. That's not recommended if you're a brain surgeon or something, but I'm not, right? So for me, time is more important than 100% quality.
So just following on from the sale of JBW Group, you're now effectively a sort of private equity / venture capital investor. Can you talk through some of the businesses that you've been involved in? What is it since end of 2010 when you sold 2017? You sold JBW Group. So the last 7 years basically.
So immediately after selling JBW, actually, I had intentions to set up an investment fund, but instead I set up a new business 6 or 7 days later, which was taking the tech idea that JBW had done, but taking it on a wider platform to introduce it to banks and building societies. And we were just really fortunate in that business. So we'd owned it for, I think 9 months, maybe 10 months. And I got a call from the people who had bought JBW and said, we'd be really interested in buying this business because, we think that it's got quite a lot of intelligence in it that we're using to compete. Would you be interested in selling it? I mean, it's 9 months old, right? We had hardly any turnover. We were onto a good thing, but I said, well, not really. They said, well, So we'll make an offer, but make it once because I'm not interested in wasting time. We're really busy. We're a team of 6 or 7 people working tirelessly to do this. And they said, okay. And then a week later, I was in Europe and I woke up and opened an email and they said, we'll give you £9.8 million for it. And I thought, that's just over £1 million for every month since I sold JBW. I'll take it, please. So I sold that. And it was quite funny because I went back to them and said, okay, we'll do a deal, but you have to complete within 8 weeks because we had some contracts going on. We didn't want the distraction. And they said, we'll complete in 3. And they did. They completed in 3. But that was a bit of an abrupt end because I wasn't too sure what I was going to do because my next 5 years were planned. I was going to run Hito and try and sell it internationally into the banking world. So I took a little bit of time off, about 7 weeks. And one of the organizations we were working with at Hito during that year was a consulting business into the banking and government sector, who had so much procurement authority. So every time you went to bid for a contract, it was these people sat opposite you who would tell the client if they should buy from you or not. And I thought, that's a great company. So I went and met the CEO, initially to invest in it, and about 8 weeks later I bought it it was a tiny company losing about 400 grand a year. I bought it for 2.7 million pounds, and that company now trades in the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and employs a couple of hundred people. And that's really been a great platform business because it's got such a blue chip client base that I knew that I could launch other products beneath it. So while that business was growing internationally and doing wonderful things, we also launched a new business in the tech space called Just in 2019, which is, bad time to launch a business, just pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, yeah.
But that's now gone on and is profitable and one of the leading companies in its space. And that's really a lot of my focus. But I also did in the meantime, or during that, set up an investment fund, and we made a number of investments. Dyslexia was one of my first, which we sold a couple of years ago, which most people will know of. I'm an investor in Spoke, the men's clothing brand.
I'm actually wearing Spoke trousers.
Brilliant. So you're an advocate, yes.
Yeah.
So for those that haven't tried a pair of Spoke trousers, they're brilliant. And that was an early investment and one that we carry on with today that's doing well in both the UK and the US. So I'm really privileged now that I get to do what I love, which is creating new businesses, but I don't invest in startups because I find it too much of a gamble. So I start businesses myself where I've got an interest with the right team, but don't invest in them, but do provide growth equity for other organizations like Spoke, Dyslexia, Privitar, and a number of others. And
are you on the hunt for more investment opportunities, or are you kind of your plate's quite full at the moment?
Yeah, no, never on the hunt. I mean, the reality is there's still too many deals, and that's always been the case since EIS and SEIS tax strategies. So I generally don't look at any deal that's not been come through a personal recommendation. And even then, it's rare for me to look at a deal right now. I mean, we have about 13 companies, some that we own the majority of, some we own a super minority of, sort of 35% and above, and a bunch that we own a small percentage of, but it's enough to keep me and my small team at my family office really busy.
No doubt. I mean, your book, Unsexy Business, highlights overlooked sectors, and I guess you've kind of given a couple of examples. You've given a couple of examples of that. Obviously, JBW, the bailiff industry is definitely not a sexy industry. Government procurement, or being a gatekeeper for government procurement and blue chip procurement is also, some people might say it's sexy, but for the most part, people don't think it's very sexy. Are there any particular, without giving a game away, are there any particular sectors you're looking at right now thinking, God, that's definitely an overlooked sector that, that has some opportunity in it?
Well, I think, I think something that's top of my mind at the moment. I mean, ideas are cheap. Execution is really expensive.
All execution, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. So if I could sell my ideas, I would be a billionaire, not a millionaire, because I have plenty of them. But yeah, but to answer your question directly, I think there's a real opportunity in this space that's going to be created if we have a Labour government. By the time this goes out, we will have a government.
And most likely will be Labour.
And there is going to be an industry created there by the movement of people from private schools back to state schools, because that will create a surplus of funds for some of those parents that they're not used to having. And I don't think that they'll start using it on themselves. I think they'll be using it on additional education for their children that are now in the state school system. So you see some of these learning centres popping up around the place, sort of maths learning.
Kit McGrath is the one I can think of.
Exactly.
It's like a sort of franchise type business, isn't it?
Yeah. So, for any of the listeners or viewers that have used tutors, they're really tough to come by. You don't know if they're any good. You've got to invite them into your home. I think that process of having academies, cheap retail space that no one can actually work out how to repurpose it, as sort of quasi-private education hubs where children can leave state school at 3:30 and go and do an hour and a half of additional education in more of a private setting. I think there's a real opportunity there, and I'll share it because I haven't got time to do anything about it. But I do see that's, one of the things I like to do is I like to look at the externalities that are going on around me and see what opportunities are being created by them, because then you can feel real markets come into life. And that feels to me that there is no way on earth that those parents that are forced to take their children from private to state school are going to take their £20,000 that they're now saving and simply spend it on themselves. They are going to be investing it back into their children in a different way. And if you can work out what way that is, I think that's a great sector to start looking at.
I think that what you've just said, it has a lot of merit, and I know a few people in the educational sector and who maybe I will loop you in with outside of this conversation. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. In addition to retail space, there's a lot of office space that is also now, as someone who has recently bought a business park with a very broad horizon as to the types of occupiers that we'll take. I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense, that there are a lot of parents, particularly from certain demographics, for whom it's the private school education for their children is not a status symbol for keeping up with the Joneses. It's so that their children have the best potential start in life, and making private education now out of reach for them for that extra 20%. And whilst I do think a lot of those parents who are already making massive sacrifices will just make even further, will burrow even further into the future to make sure that their kids still have that. There will always be a breaking point. There will be a breaking point for a very large. I don't want to say majority of those people, but I think a large minority of those people, it will be a breaking point for them. I think for some of them, that 20k or plus minus 20k that they're saving, they're going to spend that money on rent, or they're going to spend that money on an extra mortgage payments to live in the catchment area for the best state school. However, that's not always going to be practical, and so the alternative to that will be tutoring. And if you can create a tutoring center, if people can create tutoring centres, I think there's also an opportunity. There'll be opportunities for people from outside the UK who are maths tutors. Let's say from the Indian subcontinent, people who are good maths tutors or computer science tutors, or from South Africa, maybe English tutors. I'm throwing geographies from out, but people who've got teaching experience, who are good at teaching these particular subjects, and they'll come in and they can come in and tutor, and so you've potentially got the ability to create a whole cottage industry here. So I think there's some real merits in what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, of course, the people that should do it are the private schools, right? So the private schools rightly are concerned and annoyed with this new policy because it's going to create lost revenue for them. But they have all the facilities there. They have the car park there. They have the teachers there. They have the billing infrastructure there. They have the safeguarding infrastructure there. They could simply start to think about private education on a flexi basis, a pay-as-you-go basis. And I haven't heard any private school talk about it, but it seems to me to make perfect sense that somebody like me, if I had the time, could go along to a bunch of private schools across the country and say, I want to set up 3 classrooms from 3:30 to 6 p.m. every night for flexi private education to allow children that are not in private school to come along and be additionally tutored, or even children that are in private school. The private schools at the moment, the children leave, they go home, and then they go and sit with tutors. Why can't they sit with tutors in the school? There's creating this additional requirements on the parents to finish work early, pick them up, take them there. Create these hubs within the private schools. It allows the private schools to get back some of their lost revenue, and it enables ultimately children to get the education they deserve.
That's, I think it's an interesting point that you make, because you potentially create the conditions whereby the private schools don't have to pass on the extra 20% VAT, because they're effectively using the real estate that they've already got, the infrastructure, like you said, the safeguarding infrastructure that they've already got, to generate revenue between the hours of, let's call it 4 and 6 o'clock, for the sake of argument. And I think also that there are probably some school, because I think one of the things that people don't think about with this particular policy, it's a policy that's ultimately driven. It's a kind of it's a policy that's meant to appeal to the Labour voting base, to get them galvanised to go out and stick it to the toffs. When the reality is they're sticking it to hardworking middle class people. But ultimately, it probably is a easy vote winner for Labour in terms of the people that would naturally always vote Labour. It's going to galvanise them. But I think, in addition, people don't think about the number of teachers who won't go from the private sector to the state sector, because actually they like the hours, they like the holidays, they like the flexibility of working in the private sector, and they probably like being around not quote unquote nicer people. Don't kill me, state school parents, but that's their perception, not what I'm saying. And I think as a consequence of that, and then you've got the schools which I think are operating very marginally as it is, and will ultimately end up having to close down because they were at breaking point, and now they're going to have to give up. This potentially, what you're suggesting, potentially creates another way of saying those schools that are on the margins, they're about to effectively close down. It gives them an opportunity to find another way of maintaining maintaining or boosting the streams of revenue so that they can continue to operate.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right. There's nothing to lose from Sir Keir Starmer introducing this, because it's a vote winner for most Labour supporters. Although I do think that it's a vote loser for those that may have converted at this time after being fed up with the status quo. So one thing I would say is it's never useful to give government money to distribute. It's always distributed better from private sector. It simply gets washed up in things. So for somebody to say we're going to take money from here and spend it there, it just doesn't work like that. It goes from there, goes into a big pot and gets spent on anything. It might originally go that way, but it never ends up that way. So I think if you really wanted private education to support state education, there are better ways to do it. They tried academies within the state school sector of recent years, which was reasonably effective. But there's no reason you couldn't say, for example, that for private schools to have this tax break, we expect you to give 10% of your revenue or 20% of your resource to the immediate 4 state schools within your area to bring them up to similar levels. I would like to see more of the world trying to work together rather than creating more them and us.
Yeah.
Right? So if we could have every private school had to be buddied up with 2 state schools, and what that might look like, I don't know. They might, the head of the private school might have to sit as chair of the state schools or vice versa. But to really try and bring social mobility is such a powerful thing. And we're not going to create it by creating more barriers. We've got to work together.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the Margaret Thatcher quote, but she's effectively saying, that we don't succeed as a society by trying to make everyone equally poor. Surely we want I saw a quite good tweet by Daniel Priestley, he's the entrepreneur, a couple of days ago, and he was highlighting the amount of tax paid by the sort of top 1%, and he was what he was highlighting was that what we need to do is, the rich and the wealthy already pay a huge amount of tax. What we should be trying to do is create more rich and wealthy people to pay more tax, rather than to squeeze people who are already contributing more than their fair share.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I guess, we shouldn't spend too long on it. This podcast might go out and we may have a different government. But look, I think this isn't directed at just VAT and school fees. The reality is government are profoundly bad at allocating resource. They are terrible at
completely.
So giving them more to allocate badly is not the answer to any of our issues.
No.
Simply is not. And it doesn't matter what political party you support, they are all terrible at allocating resource. We need a better solution for it, and it's not to give them more money. And I accept it's also not to simply just say, well, austerity and efficiencies and start cutting staff out. Some of these things just need rethinking. Like we were talking about a little while ago, the education system, it simply needs to be rethought about and reimagined and redesigned.
Well, I agree with that. And I think also, you also got to look at the health sector, health service. You have it's the same principle applies, and obviously we don't want to go down in that rabbit hole too far. But ultimately you need a root and branch reform of the health sector. You've got a health service in this country, which was designed the best part of 80 years ago, when people were living to 60, men were living to 60, 65. The state pension age was 60, 65, because people, and that worked because people weren't living that long. Now people are living much longer, but they're really unhealthy in those final years, and they put this massive strain on a health service that that's unable to cope with it.
Yeah, the circumstances, the stuff that's being put in has changed, right? Yeah. Which means the output's going to be different. I mean, you don't need a genius to work this out. And for government to simply just keep on saying, well, we're going to continue doing it. They hide behind this, well, it's too difficult to change. I mean, we're sat in central London. When somebody decided that they wanted it to be more cycle friendly, they managed to design a cycle superhighway and implement it in a number of years. You can't tell me that that's easier than sitting at an education system, which is quite similar, replicated across the entire country, and employing a bunch of very clever people from the gaming sector, the media industry, the academics, and saying, how do we reimagine this and give this a go? We can do it for superhighways. We can do it for double red lines that closed one of my early business. We can do it for almost anything that's revenue generating. But we can't do it for the things that matter most, our health and our education.
Yeah. I got a feeling we could probably eulogize and debate on this for a while longer. I want to take a sort of start the wind down, ask you a little bit more, ask you a few more sort of personal questions now in terms about lifestyle. We were talking about how our mutual connection, Jonathan Bowman Perks, connected us. Obviously, we've both been on each other's podcasts, and Jonathan was kindly was a guest last year on my podcast as well. I think you know him via his via personal trainer connection of yours, and you've been up to Jonathan's gym and worked out a couple of times. Is fitness and exercise a big part of your life now?
Yeah, I mean, well, fitness and exercise has always been a big part of my life. And going back to the IMPS, it was ingrained in us to do PT every morning at 6:30 a.m. from age 5. That sort of difficult 12, 15 years of running business, day in, day out, probably drinking too much, not eating that well. I lost it a bit, but yeah, it's hugely important to me. So I do CrossFit 6 days a week. I exercise 7 days a week. And for me, it's for the mental health benefits as much as the being physically fit, strong, and let's face it. Now I still want to look good. I'm 45 now, so it catches up with you.
No, but I have to say, I'm sure our audience would agree. You look fantastic for it. So I'm only a few years behind you. So I've got something to aspire to.
Well, it gets more difficult. I know that, but it's great, and you got to love it, right?
Well, I agree with that, and I think increasingly I'm prioritizing my workouts, fitness, exercise over and above everything else that I do. Obviously I have the luxury of not having to be at a fixed desk any time. Being an entrepreneur and an owner of multiple businesses, not too dissimilar to yourself, but maybe slightly different industries and different scales. But for me, the first thing I've got to do is like work out, when am I going to work out today? And preferably that workout needs to be first thing in the day to get it out of the way. So that, it's funny how I've got to that stage in life where the priorities have changed, but it sounds like that's been something you've been doing since 5 years old. So, I'm not sure you're ever going to lose it.
No, I'm really fortunate on that. And it's something that I try and install in my children now. So, I take my eldest who's 8 for a run of a weekend, and my youngest does judo, and we do that. We're about to start jiu-jitsu together a few times a week. I just think it's really, if you can install it in children, especially young girls. I have 2 girls, and I'm quite committed to making sure that my girls grow up understanding that exercise is not about weight loss, because I'm fearful that that's what happens to young girls, and that's a real challenge. So, and going back to your point about, when do I fit in my workout and stuff, I agree with you. It's got to be something that's on your mind every day. So I knew this morning that I was having to do an interview before here and then here. So I didn't get to go to the gym, but I have left the room in my diary for just telephone calls, no video calls. I don't know why no one's capable of doing telephone calls anymore. Everything has to be a video call. But I've got 2 telephone calls from here for the next 1.5 hours, and I will walk. We're in Cannon Street now, and I'm going to walk to Marylebone because I didn't get to go to the gym this morning. So I just go, well, where in my day can I fit in some form of exercise? And one of the things I'm a huge advocate for is walking. There's almost better benefits to walking than almost any other form of exercise when you look at it from a weight loss, cardiovascular, and mental health combined. So you can always fit in some form of exercise, with it be never use the lift at work, always use the stairs, walk to and from work, get off the bus 3 stops early and walk that last bit. There are always opportunities. And it grains on me a bit when people go, we just simply don't have the time.
Yeah, I sort of hear and see that. And I was actually traveling in sort of Central Europe, where one of the businesses I'm involved in is based this week. And I made a point that on all 3 of the days I got, as minimum requirements, 10,000 steps in, and I'm not a big runner actually. I'm not well, I should say I'm big. I'm big, but I ran, but I'm not running is not really my thing. But I still managed to get a 4 or 5K run in on Tuesday, just as a way of sort of getting a bit of a sweat on, because I just think you feel so much better as a consequence of that. When you walk, though, do you listen to do you do calls, or do you listen to podcasts, or do you ever have moments when you're just walking with nothing? Because one of the things that certainly the rare times that I'm not listening to a podcast or something, or not on a call, on a walk, you just get so many ideas that come into my head. What are the other benefits you find when you're having that walk?
Yeah, so I would close to 100% of all my walks are without any form of media. Right. I try to enjoy the walk. It's difficult because a day like today, a couple of interviews, so you're offline, then it's easier to do the walk while making some phone calls. But I walk a lot. I love it. If I can walk every day for half an hour at least, I will. And if that means that it needs to be while on a video call on my mobile phone, or or listening to a podcast or reading something, then it just has to be that way. But I introduced walking into my exercise regime about 2 years ago, and it's been transformational. My body fat percentage is maintained lower than ever. My muscle maintenance and ability to gain muscle is so much better than if I run, where I'm typically burning away at my muscle gains. So for me, I just wish I would have realized 30, 40 years ago the real benefits of simply walking.
Yeah.
They're just, it's unreal. And I tell everybody now, if there's 2 fitness things that I could pass on to everyone, it's walk more and eat tons of protein. Nobody consumes enough protein. Everybody you ask just simply doesn't consume enough. And it's not easy to get the right amount of protein in your body. But, for most men, they should be aiming for probably 160 to 200 grams of protein a day. It's a lot.
It is, and to be fair, you're preaching to the converted when you're talking to me about this. But I also know a number of people who, especially close to home, struggle with their protein numbers. I think a lot of women find it difficult to get enough protein in the diet, especially if they're not that keen on eating meat, which obviously is a very effective source of protein. In terms of lifestyle. Do you still drink as well, or is that, because I think a lot of people who've come on the show over the last 3 or 4 months, we've seen quite a big increase in the number of business leaders who are non-drinkers. Have you made any changes to your drinking habits over the past few years?
Yeah, I have. I definitely do. I'm more of a do long stints without drink. So last year I did 5 months for the summer while we lived abroad without drinking. But I actually quite like drinking. I quite like the benefits of drinking, without children for the night. Wife and I get a hotel, go out, get drunk, go to Ronnie Scott's. It's fun, right? But I also see, I guess I'm fortunate that I'm so committed to my exercise and well-being that drinking in moderation just has to be the norm. But I equally love going to a beach club in Ibiza for the day and drinking a few bottles of champagne and a couple of whiskeys on the way home.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that there's a good number of our listeners, in the specialist finance industry who still enjoy a drink, who I'm sure would love to hang out with you and have a good party with you in Ibiza. No, that sounds really cool. I guess sort of the final couple of questions now. In terms of mentors, mentorship, I think I've got the name Dave Waitson here. He's the chap who helped you, get JBW going. Are there any other people in your life who you'd like to acknowledge today as important mentors? People who've been significant influences in your life.
Yeah, it's such a great question actually, because I've got another book in mind, which is called Old Friends, because I'm a strong believer that the young can get so much from having older people in their life as mentors, as guidance. Like as you mentioned, Dave Waitson, when I set up JBW, but before Dave, it was Roy Pratt, who was the owner of the motorcycle team, who was simply like a father to me growing up and still is today. Dave Waits, my mum, showed me how to love and was just a rock by my side until she passed. Dave Waitson at JBW, a friend of mine, Jane Farrell, who taught me about just understanding inclusivity and diversity and bringing people together to achieve better outcomes. My wife and ultimately my children. I mean, my children, one of the things that I try to do a lot of now is switch that phone off, put it away, and spend time being real present with my kids. But rather than seeing it as a gift to them, they should be pleased that I'm putting my phone away and spending time with them, I see it as the opposite. I go, if I do this, I'm going to learn so much from them. I'm going to learn about being present. I'm going to learn about having fun. I'm going to learn about stripping away all of the stresses of today. They simply focus on such small, what's to them very important things, and we just don't understand. So I think from here onwards, I really, really hope that my mentors for the next 30, 40, if I'm lucky enough, 50 to 60 years will be Emily and Allegra, my two girls.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be a mentor of a number of people through University of Reading / Henley Business School, and then also some, I suppose, I sort of quasi mentor a few other business leaders in the wider sort of property and specialist finance industry. And people ask me why I do it and what do I get from it. And the thing is that one of the things I love about young people who are younger than me, I'm only 42, so not like that old, but is I really love the energy that you get, the energy and the enthusiasm when you've been in business for 20 plus years like I have now, and similar for yourself, even longer. Once you get ground down, but I think the buzz and the verve and the energy that you had is not quite there. But then you spend some time around someone who's at the earlier stage, who was where you might have been 10, 15 years ago, whatever. You get an opportunity to sort of suck in a little bit of that energy in it, and it gives you ideas, and it reignites that spark. So for me, and again, the point you make about the children, again, nothing recenters you, in my opinion, like hanging around with your children, because my kids do not care that I'm a successful business person. All the things the stories that we tell ourselves, the myths we tell ourselves as entrepreneurs about things that are important. When I get home, my kids do not give a shit. They don't care. They're just like, fuck off, Dad. You want to play Fortnite, you want to go and
it's brilliant, right?
Throw a ball, whatever,
And it sort of brings you back down to earth, which is probably needed from time to time. Just one point on your sort of mentoring young people in universities and stuff like that. I think that's brilliantly. And one of the chaps I interviewed for the book, Paul Orfler. So Paul made $2 billion, and he's now a professor of entrepreneurship at Southern California. And I was sat in his garden and I said, Paul, why? Why do you get up every day and go and teach kids about entrepreneurship? And Paul said to me, Jamie, I'm around these young, energetic, attractive, boundary-pushing individuals every day of the week, and it keeps me young and energetic and pushing the boundaries myself too. And I just thought, he's got such a great point. Where else? And he said to me, where else in the world would I want to be?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, I'm drinking that Kool-Aid all day over the week. So that's really cool. Last question for you, and this is a sort of quick fire one. It's a bit like Jonathan's one that he likes to do as well. If you could give your 16-year-old self some self-talk, knowing what you do now, what would you say to yourself, and maybe explain why?
I would say I would tell myself to be more kind to people, because I think on the way up, a lot of my success was driven at the cost of other people's unhappiness, previous partners and things like that. And as you mature and you realize what's important in life, you go, that was a bit shitty. And it's a bit of a stigma attached to entrepreneurship, I guess. 20 years ago, you were sort of considered to be a businessman, you had to be tough. It's not quite true. So I would tell myself to be more kind to everybody, including myself.
Well, I have to say, Jamie, it's been a revelation meeting you and chatting to you for the last sort of hour and a half. So thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant. Obviously to try and protect your kids from their dad being consumed by too many inbounds on social media, you feel free to bat this back. But I'm sure there's a number of people in our audience who are going to want to reach out to you and connect with you and learn more about you. What's the best way for someone to reach out and get in touch if they want to say hi and thank you for sharing your thoughts over the last hour and a half?
Yes, so you can reach me on LinkedIn. I avoid all other social media channels. I just don't see the value in it for myself personally in life. But you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And, two other things I would say is if you are interested in dyslexia or how you can even benefit from thinking like a dyslexic person, get yourself a copy of the book. And if you honestly are listening to this podcast and you can't afford a copy of the book, reach out to me and I'll get one to you for free.
Well, that's very kind. But, again, we're going to put the details of the book are in the show notes, but you can see it here. It's the Dyslexic Edge, written by Jamie, and with the support of Dr. Helen Taylor as well. So I myself am delighted that Jamie's given me a copy of this to read, and I'll be plastering social media with my thoughts on it in very due course, and after I've read it in about 2 hours, because that's the speed I read at. Right, Jamie, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. I'll look forward to having you on again at some point, if you'd be delighted to come on. To our audience, thank you for joining us as ever. I've been Michael Dean. I'm at property_funder, and you can find me on the internet and connect with me in that way. And for now, thanks very much, and we'll talk to you in the next one.